Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in this hot venue. Better late than never, right? So thanks for coming to my talk about the long road home for blockchain technology. Right? I was asked to discuss two things today. First of all, let's talk a bit about BCG's view on where do we see enterprise and blockchain going forward together. And the second thing I'd like to talk to you is an actual use case. Right? It's one of the things that I tried to do early in the blockchain space was to build as many use cases as we could so that we can learn what works and what doesn't. And the other thing that I learned is it's always good to share back, right? So I'm going to dive in now. And first of all, a little bit of a summary, right? So what have we learned? It's nice. I can actually see the audience because the slide is wide. So hi, everyone. Three things we learned, really. The biggest question we still get in the boardroom today is, how much energy does it use? And to me, that's surprising, and to you probably as well. But when you talk to board members of enterprises, the first thing that comes to mind is sometimes risk, right? And they would like to know, what risks are we running here? Are we not affiliating with the wrong technology stack that is not popular for our sustainability goals? But fortunately, blockchains have come to great strides, and they are now much more energy efficient, right? Polkadot's doing a great job as well. So that's one tick in the box. The second thing is that transaction speeds, fortunately, have improved a long way since 2009. When we were all still struggling to fit everything into 7 transactions per second. So this is what we're achieving today is enough to sustain most blockchain applications that we see out there. Of course, there's some that require more, especially payments. But for most applications and use cases that people are thinking of today, what is currently offered by most blockchain technologies is perfectly fine. And the third thing that we really appreciate is the flexibility that blockchain technology currently offers. Right? There's so much more you can do in terms of configurability, in terms of plugging in oracles, in terms of configuring your palettes or your parachains. So we see that the flexibility makes sure that you don't really have to start iterating on blockchain constraints early in use case development. And that's a big win, because if you can focus on the use case, you can have a lot more progress initially, and you're not being slowed down to what limitations blockchain might observe. Now, some people might not see blockchain as a limitation, but there are limitations, right? So one of the limitations has nothing to do with the quality of the tech stack, but with the abundance of it. There are a lot of level 1 blockchains actually out there. And if you talk to enterprises, it's very difficult for them to find out which one actually adds value and which one doesn't. And in fact, what we see when new blockchains are introduced is that it becomes harder and harder to articulate what is the actual business value here, right? What blockchain really helps, what new consensus mechanism really makes a difference. Because those differences are no longer made in tech, they're actually made on the application level. So an application should actually be able to benefit of what blockchain technology brings. And this is where we see a bit of plateauing existing at the moment. What's also the case is that most blockchain ideas will work on most blockchains. Right? In the beginning, when people try to figure out, hey, what technology, how can blockchain technology help me to build a different use case for, let's say, a supply chain or an energy grid, then at that iteration moment, early in that proof of value discussion, in the proof of concept phase, it doesn't really matter which tech stack you choose. So yes, it has to become a decision later on, but in the beginning, it's not a decision. But as it becomes one, it's very difficult to find the right one because there's so much out there. Right? And this is hardly understood by most enterprises. They know blockchain as a concept, not as 10,000 different technology stacks that fight for competition. To most enterprises, there are 3 hyperscalers, they pick one, and that's the end of it. Now, for blockchain, it's not that easy, we know, but how do you convey that message? And how do you help enterprises select that right tech stack? That's difficult, and it sometimes shies them away from it. The second thing is, and this is a personal peeve of mine, is that I feel that not enough great use cases actually exist. Right? Because there's a lot of focus on building great technology, but sometimes there's very little understanding of why we're building that technology in the first place. I think that the disillusion phase we've long passed, right? When blockchain was first popularized and people were looking at the possibilities that the early and second-gen blockchains brought, everybody was really enthusiastic and jumping on this bandwagon, just like people are doing with Gen AI at the moment. And then, well, that disillusionment came, and that's fine. But the question is, if you have developed so much technology, then in the end, the only question is like, how do we make sure that we can benefit of it? Right? And this is a challenge that most organizations face. jumping that chasm is a big call for them. And what we've seen happening is that some blockchains decide to take matters into their own hands and start further developing business cases that clients brought to them or that they learned about and start evolving them. Energy Web Foundation, that was just here on stage, is actually a good example because they've been looking at a number of commercial use cases that leverage their technology stack, and they've been building that. And the great thing about it is, like, if they get that kind of commercial revenue in for an application that runs on their tech stack, that application helps to maintain the tech stack as well and helps it to develop further for new use cases. So use cases are, for me, the key in enterprise adoption. And before I dive into the other key, tokens that are securities is just a risk flag. I'm not saying that this currently hinders adoption, but the uncertainty over time will. And it's too early to tell how things will play out, but it is something that we need to be cognizant of. If you talk to legal or finance departments in enterprises and you ask them, hey, would you mind having tokens on your balance sheet for this great application we just came up with? Mind you, we don't know if they're security, yes or no. You just open Pandora's box of compliance. And you'll spend months trying to figure out what is the risk portfolio that meets that certain company. And it's just a lot of complication. And it usually deteriorates the actual value of the solution. So I personally do hope that this area of uncertainty quickly develops and that we can move to develop use cases. And about these use cases, this is to me the key issue, right? Building these enterprise ecosystems that we're all so fond of is just damn hard, right? And there are a number of reasons why it is so hard. But I think that everybody has been trying to build out an application on the blockchain. They quickly realize this is not about one enterprise client that wants to do something on a blockchain, right? This is a group of companies that would want to work together, leveraging blockchain technology as their means of communication and helping to make sure everybody stays honest. Sometimes immutability is not even the biggest considerator here. They just want to collaborate, but nobody trained them how to. Because, as things are today, companies are not used to work together from a technology level. Some have gone to a level of maturity where they can offer an API, which is to a lot of enterprises already significant achievement. Most companies are still stuck in the comma-separated value era, or if you go even further back than that, you get EDI messages or other serial-based protocols that were once invented that people agreed on and basically said, look, the fact that we agreed on a standard was the highest possible achievement of the day, so let's just stick with that because it was so difficult to agree on something else. And I can relate to this. I can see that when we talk to clients about how do we innovate, that finding out how to collaborate with others is the biggest issue. It's not about iterating a great idea that will make things better. It's really about finding a way to make it share them with their peers without running into this competition game. And sometimes, even if they want to, they can't because there's competition law in place. And we see this in large sectors like the energy sector, where the competition law basically says large players cannot do this, but small players don't have the funds, right? And you're running into an innovation paralysis. So that's one of the problems that we see. And the other problem is the high upfront capex to get started, right? So if you want to build this ecosystem and you would want to help you and your peers to automate things in your supply chain, then you have to invest. You have to get started. And I think the ecosystem in blockchain is generally very open to sharing that innovation cost. But for enterprises, this is still something to consider, right? There's a price to pay for being an industry leader, and there's very little guarantee that they will succeed. Because do others actually want them or allow them to be a leader? Do they allow them to step up? Or do you get into the not invented here syndrome? It's difficult to tell up front. So it's a risk to invest this money. That's the second reason. And the third reason is usually existing when you actually start to develop. I think that agile way of working has brought a lot more collaboration when it comes to having technology developers and business consultants work together in building applications. But when you design a blockchain ecosystem, you also have to start thinking about governance, right? It's not just about what is the functionality of the utility of the solution we build, but also what are the agreements we have in making this collaborate? What is the sharing that we all feel comfortable with? And that is usually a governance process, which is a lot more slower than just a utility discussion, and that takes a long time. And development cycles are simply not set up for that. So what do? We sort of like let legal out of that this development cycle. And we let them stand over there and say, we'll get to you when we get there. And what happens if legal is left out? They stop the project at the end, and rightfully so. Especially when, indeed, competition law is in place, or when sensitive data is being shared. People want to know what are the risks that we run. And it's fair to understand that they want to know this, because that's their prime job. So, is there a single-handed, awesome solution to all of this? No. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So the only thing we can do is continue to build. And what I want to do is just share you our latest case. So in the sharing is caring philosophy, hopefully we can learn from each other. Right? And this is what we built and announced yesterday together with Klöckner. Klöckner is a steel distributor in Germany. And together with them, we built a CO2 passport for steel. And as you can see, according to us, it has all these benefits. But let me first explain you a bit what is a CO2 passport. All right? And for that, I have to take one step back, which is to discuss a product carbon footprint. Now, most people in the blockchain industry have already heard about carbon credits and trading those credits, but this is not about that. Right? There are some issues with carbon credits, but the big issue is that first you need to know what your carbon emissions are before you start offsetting them. And this solution is just meant for that. So there is an industry standard, the greenhouse gas standard, that allows you to exchange information about what is actually the CO2 emission equivalent of my product. So as my product passes through a supply chain and eventually, in this case, becomes a shoe, what is the product carbon footprint? So how much carbon did it emit in its life cycle? And thanks to the GHG standard, we can calculate that. And some companies have already turned this into an advantage and start marketing products with a very low carbon footprint, such as running shoes here. And a carbon footprint of 2.94 kilos is indeed very low. Now, this is a good start, because it means that, in this case, Adidas has mapped out its entire supply chain and understand for each and every step where CO2 emissions occur. And if you add them all up, you can take responsibility and say, okay, so if these are the CO2 emissions of my product and my supply chain, then let's discuss offsetting. So the challenge might not be in offsetting and buying credits to do so. The challenge is in gathering and sharing this data. And that's exactly what we focused on. Because if we look at offsetting and sharing in steel, we have a lot of ambition ahead of us. Right? So at the left here, I'm standing in front of it myself, this is your typical product carbon footprint declaration. Right? It is not unintentionally a paper form that has a lot of information about what is the product carbon footprint of, in this case, a piece of steel. And as you can see, you name the product, you have the CO2 footprint, you give some data, and then what? Right? And Klöckner was an industry leader in that they actually built a calculation engine to calculate the product carbon footprint of all the products they sold. But what they quickly found out is that their customers who would receive this product carbon footprint declaration would simply hand it down to the next in line. So they would give this declaration to their buyer. And that's wrong, because they should have added their own emissions to it, right? Because in each and every step in the supply chain, you have emissions. So what should they have done? They should have taken this document as an input, add their own emissions, and issue a new document. And I think you can already sort of see where this is going, right? It simply didn't happen. It's a proper design process, but it was never implemented. So people start sharing PDF documents, and in the end it doesn't work. And you get a diluted CO2 footprint. Because apparently now, my running shoe is even more environmentally friendly, because people simply haven't been sharing their additions. So there's all these challenges, right? You don't even want to handle PDF documents, right? That's one challenge. But you don't have any visibility for steel on emissions that are upstream. You don't know if further upstream, some steel producer actually invested in a steel blasting furnace that is more economically friendly, that they invested in using green energy, or that they build an electric furnace, which is a lot better for the environment. Because that data is sort of lost when everybody recalculates this and just puts a new number on it. Right? What would I know about my steel producer if this is the number that I get? So all that data granularity got lost. And at some point when people buy green steel, they say, well, yeah, it's lower, good for you, You don't know why. So that's the trick here. How do you make sure that when you buy green steel, that you know what you buy? Because you need to account for this, right? So that was the issue that we started off with. And what we then designed is a way to accelerate the adoption of PCF for the steel industry by making this transparent. So we did research, and we talked to clients, and we asked them, what are the biggest pain points you have? And funnily enough, it's not immutability, right? You would expect that. And resilience, that's not what they care about at the moment, right? It could be that in the future, people start to deliberately cheat on these product carbon footprints. And in that case, resilience becomes very important. But at this stage, nobody has that concern because it's not adopted yet. So that's not something you see in our green list of benefits. What is there? Distinction between process and transport, right? How much CO2 did I emit on transport? Did I put the steel on a boat, on a truck, or an electric truck? Makes a great difference. People want to know that, so that if you add up all these numbers, including the primary data that's in there, you have a really good understanding of what the CO2 footprint is. And actually, we found out that clients, at the end of the cycle over there, they started to call the steel producer themselves and say, hey, I got this product carbon footprint. I would like to know what data is actually in there. So making this transparent is an actual solution that we believe the industry is looking forward to. So we designed this on Polkadot, and together with Parity, we built this in Ink. And what we built is a smart contract that creates tokens. But we do it a little differently. Instead of creating tokens that you forward, we create tokens that you amend. So when you create the first stage of the CO2 passport, you put your own emissions in there, and you register that on a blockchain. And then the token you forward to the buyers of your product, which in the first stage is steel ore. And when they get it, they say, well, I'm going to create a new token, but in that token, I'm going to link to the token that I received. So now you have granularity, because I can see those emissions, and I can see those as well. And this step we repeat throughout the entire steel supply chain, and thus at the end, you just don't get the compounded number, but you get full granularity on all the PCF emissions, of all the CO2 emissions that are actually there. And there's no other way to do this than with blockchain, right? If you start to share data through centralized services, then yeah, you solve the automation problem, but you still don't solve the problem of data granularity and quality, because you would still not know where the primary data is from. So this solution we introduced yesterday, and well, before I get into this, quick link, that we will open source this. And for anybody who is affiliated with the steel industry, let us know if you're interested. We'd like to hear your feedback on it, right? There's plenty of stuff we can improve on to make it fit every use case. But Kloeckner wanted to take that leap as an industry leader and help the industry forward. And now we come back to that difficult step of how do we build an ecosystem? Well, for that, we need a community. So that's why we're sharing. So the smart contract will be open source soon. And if you were to interpret one of the smart contracts that's currently on the Rococo testnet, then we build an API layer, and we could actually extract the data in the smart contract through JSON, so that enterprises don't have to worry about interpreting all these contracts, because that's not their cup of tea, right? And they would actually get the emissions, the separation between transport and process, etc. But what we deliberately left out are the sensitive data points, right? We don't put order in there, we don't put name in there. On the blockchain, it's nothing more than an identifier of a steel product between buyer and seller that nobody else knows about, plus the metadata of the actual steel product and the emissions. So you know emissions, you know something about the product, but that's about it. So there was no reason for us to hide this behind a private or permissioned ledger. It's open information that you can audit, as long as you know what it means to you. And that was the design call, and I'm happy that we got there. Now, before I wrap up, this is our roadmap, and this is us trying to solve that ecosystem challenge, right? We are now at the limited testing phase, where together with a number of clients and suppliers from Kloeckner, we're going to test how this works in practice. So we're going to run this smart contract, we're going to put some emissions on it, and we're going to share this data and see how it performs in practice. And I'm sure we'll run into a dozen interesting cases that we can look into further. And of course, when we're doing that, we would like to start adding more and more parties to this testing. So we're looking to open this up and find more organizations, steel to steel supply chain, to work with to further improve this solution. And in the end, of course, we would like this to be a standard, not because Klöckner benefits from it, but because the entire steel industry benefits from it. Because they no longer have to hand out PDF documents to share this data, and they no longer have to make phone calls to figure out if the data is actually correct. So this was our explanation of a use case. 17 seconds remaining. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Sander. Any questions, perhaps? This is a super exciting use case. All right, while we're setting up the stage, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
Can anybody name a parachain, at least one parachain on Polkadot that is focusing on sustainability? BitGreen. Anyone else? Sander? Yeah. Do you know any parachain focusing on sustainability?
We didn't look at that yet because we're not there, but more than happy to learn more about it.
So there is Unique Network, NFT parachain, that launched Digital Art for Climate initiative and also carbon credits. There's also EverCity parachain on Kusama. They're also working on carbon credits. And Energy Web is focusing on sustainability and energy grids. So this is a very exciting topic. A lot of artists actually in the NFT space are very, very excited about sustainability topic because a lot of people are conscious about how we use our resources. They want to build on sustainable blockchains, and they want to work with teams and companies and founders who take responsibility for their environmental action.
Yeah, I'd like to add that it becomes a disqualifier at some point, right? You cannot build a sustainable solution for steel on an unsustainable blockchain stack. So it's fair that people ask this question. And it's just something that has to be right, but it doesn't directly generate a lot of business value. But we're happy with the partnerships that we're currently developing, and we're happy to move this forward. And in the end, sustainability is going to be the new norm, whether we like it or not. But I do.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Sander, for this conversation.